the royal world is buzzing. And not in the polite, ceremonial way we've grown used to. Something unprecedented is happening right now inside Clarence House. A reunion that nobody expected, a meeting that insiders are already calling historic, and the outcome could change the very landscape of the British monarchy. Could it be that Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, might be stripped of his title? Could King Charles, the monarch of the United Kingdom, actually hand it to someone else? Someone nobody predicted? Someone like Sophie, Countess of Wessex? These are not just rumors. These are the whispers circulating inside the palace corridors, from the servants' quarters to the boardrooms where advisors make decisions in hushed tones. And tonight, we're going to dive deep into it all. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins with a reunion at Clarence House. A meeting between father and son that was supposed to be private, intimate, a chance to reconcile after years of tension, public spats, and media storms. But insiders say the reunion was anything but simple. Imagine the tension. Two men with a lifetime of history, personal grievances, and public scrutiny, sitting in a room together under the glare of history and tradition. The eyes of the world may not have been in that room, but the consequences of what happened there will ripple for years to come. Prince Harry arrived, reportedly tense but composed. King Charles, steady as ever in public, is said to have been carefully measured in his approach. And yet, behind closed doors, the air was thick with emotion, anger, disappointment, longing, and perhaps a hint of regret. According to palace insiders, the two did not waste time on pleasantries. The conversation reportedly dove straight into the heart of their fractured relationship. Harry's exit from royal duties, his life in America, his public interviews, and yes, the matter of his titles, the Sussex title, the one that carries centuries of history and weight in the monarchy. Now, you might be asking, why would this reunion matter to the average person? Titles, after all, are symbolic. They don't dictate your day-to-day life. But in the context of the British monarchy, they are far more than that. They carry power, influence, legacy, and access. They determine who is publicly celebrated and who is quietly sidelined. And if Prince Harry were to lose his title, or even face the threat of losing it, it would not just be a personal blow. It would send shockwaves through the royal family, the media, and the public. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your name, your identity, even your place in history, could be redefined by a decision made behind palace walls. That is exactly the level of tension we are dealing with. But what makes this story even more shocking is the role of Sophie, Countess of Wessex. A figure often underestimated in public perception, Sophie has quietly positioned herself as a significant influence within the palace. Known for her loyalty, her diplomacy, and her careful navigation of royal protocol, she has avoided the tabloid frenzy that surrounds the Sussexes. Yet, insiders claim that she has emerged from the shadows with a subtle but powerful strategy, one that could place her in line for the very title currently held by Prince Harry. The audacity of this plan, if true, is staggering. And the palace, we are told, is buzzing with speculation. The Sussex title itself is not just a decorative honor. It has a history that intertwines with the monarchy's most celebrated and controversial figures. Created for Prince Harry upon his marriage to Meghan Markle, it symbolized hope, modernization, and a new chapter for the royal family. But the title is also a flashpoint, a marker of public attention, and a magnet for scrutiny. And now, with Harry's estrangement and Sophie's quiet maneuvering, that same title could become the center of one of the most dramatic power shifts in recent royal history. What makes this story even more riveting is the timing. The reunion at Clarence House did not occur in isolation. It came at a moment of intense media coverage, public speculation, and internal palace tension. Harry's recent public appearances, statements, and interviews have reignited debates about loyalty, duty, and family dynamics. Meanwhile, Charles is navigating his own challenges, a monarchy under pressure, a public eager for drama, and a family that is increasingly fragmented. And somewhere in this intricate web, Sophie is said to be watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to act. Some might wonder, is this all just palace rumor? Could this be exaggerated for media consumption? But multiple insiders have hinted at the reality of the situation, emphasizing that there is a documented process behind title reassignment, a quiet but formidable set of precedents that allow the monarch to make decisions that ripple across generations. Harry's reaction, when he learned of these potential moves, is said to have been one of disbelief mixed with anger. Can you imagine receiving news that a title you've held, one that carries your identity and history, could be taken from you and given to someone else? Emotions ran high during the reunion. According to reports, the conversation between Harry and Charles was charged with raw honesty and suppressed resentment. There were moments of silence that spoke louder than words, gestures that betrayed underlying tensions, and expressions that suggested the weight of decades of family conflict. Harry is said to have expressed both frustration and vulnerability, acknowledging mistakes, expressing disappointment in media narratives, and perhaps most importantly, confronting the possibility that his position within the royal family is not as secure as he once believed. Meanwhile, Sophie's role is a story of subtlety and strategy. Often in the shadows, rarely the subject of scandal, she has cultivated a reputation for loyalty and discretion. But insiders suggest that this quiet demeanor masks a keen awareness of palace politics. Her appearances, charitable work, and advisory influence are said to be carefully timed and calculated. Some sources even hint that she has been preparing for an opportunity that could see her rise in prominence, while Harry faces the possibility of being sidelined. The intrigue here is palpable. Could Sophie be the person who emerges as the unexpected heir to the Sussex title, stepping into a role many assumed was untouchable? And then there's the public reaction, or, rather, the anticipation of it. The palace is acutely aware of how the world perceives titles, family dynamics, and power shifts. A decision of this magnitude would not just affect Harry and Sophie. It would shape public opinion, media narratives, and the legacy of the monarchy for years to come. The palace reportedly monitors every social media trend, every media article, and every public statement, weighing the potential fallout of any move. And insiders claim that the conversations within Clarence House took this into account. Every word, every gesture, every nuance calculated with precision. So what does all of this mean? It means that history is in the making. It means that the reunion at Clarence House was not just a meeting. It was a turning point. It means that the Sussex title, a symbol of privilege, history, and personal identity, could soon have a new face attached to it. And it means that Prince Harry, despite his fame, influence, and public persona, may be facing a challenge unlike any he has encountered before. But perhaps the most shocking element of all is this. Insiders claim that the decision, or at least the framework for the decision, was already being considered before Harry even stepped foot in Clarence House. Could it be that this reunion was not about reconciliation at all? Could it be that Harry walked into a situation already designed to shift power, to recalibrate the monarchy, and to place Sophie in a position of unprecedented influence? The implications are staggering. And here's the question you need to consider. If titles can be reassigned, if influence can be maneuvered behind closed doors, and if history can be quietly rewritten by strategic actors, then what does that say about loyalty, family, and legacy? Is Prince Harry truly in control of his destiny, or is he at the mercy of palace politics, tradition, and carefully orchestrated timing? And what role will Sophie play as the story unfolds, as the decisions are finalized, and as the world watches in disbelief? We are standing at the edge of one of the most compelling royal dramas of the decade. A father and son at odds, a reunion charged with tension, a title hanging in the balance, and an unexpected contender waiting in the wings. The palace corridors are whispering, the media is buzzing, and the public cannot look away. But what actually happened behind those closed doors at Clarence House, and why Sophie may be the new Sussex heir, is more shocking than anyone imagined. And just when you think you have the full picture, remember this: the story does not end here. The reunion is only the beginning. The decision is only part of the drama. And the consequences will ripple through the monarchy, the media, and the world in ways that no one is fully prepared to handle. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What actually happened when Prince Harry stepped through the doors of Clarence House? That's the question everyone wants the answer to. And insiders say the reality is far more intense than any headline could ever capture. The reunion between father and son wasn't just a casual chat over tea. It was a confrontation wrapped in decades of tension, a negotiation of feelings, and a testing of loyalties. And according to those close to the palace, what unfolded in that room could change the monarchy forever. Harry arrived in London under the radar, avoiding the media frenzy that always seems to follow him. But even his careful planning couldn't shield the gravity of what awaited inside. Security protocols were tighter than ever, and every step he took toward Clarence House was monitored, analyzed, and debated. Imagine walking into a place that is both home and office, where every glance carries meaning and every gesture can be dissected for hidden signals. Harry, seasoned by years of media scrutiny and public pressure, knew this. And yet, nothing could fully prepare him for the intensity of what was coming. King Charles, meanwhile, had been preparing for this meeting for months. Sources suggest that the monarch was acutely aware of the delicate balance he needed to maintain. He needed to reconcile with his son publicly, show empathy and authority privately, and manage the optics for the press and public alike. But insiders also claim that Charles entered the room with a purpose that went beyond reconciliation, an agenda, carefully thought out, that involved titles, legacy, and influence. The tension was palpable from the very first second. Harry, dressed formally but with an air of subtle defiance, met Charles in the Grand Hall, where the portraits of past monarchs stared down as silent witnesses. The room itself, a blend of history and formality, seemed almost alive, amplifying the weight of the moment. And when father and son finally spoke, it was with a mixture of politeness and underlying tension, a dance of words that carried both emotion and subtext. The first moments of conversation were cautious. Charles began by acknowledging the estrangement, the media battles, and the controversies that had marked the past several years. Harry responded with a mixture of apology and defensiveness, referencing interviews, public scrutiny, and perceived betrayals. Each statement, though carefully measured, carried the weight of personal history. The room, sources say, was silent at times, punctuated only by the subtle shifts of posture, the tightening of fists, or the pause of a breath that betrayed the emotions underneath. And then, according to insiders, the discussion shifted to the Sussex title. The moment was tense, almost cinematic. Harry, aware of the significance, reportedly spoke first, emphasizing his contributions, his public service, and the importance of his role as a representative of the monarchy, even while living abroad. Charles, calm but firm, reportedly countered with a historical perspective, discussing the responsibilities, precedents, and implications of holding a royal title. He is said to have carefully framed the discussion, emphasizing duty over personal desire, tradition over modernity. It was during this exchange that Sophie's name reportedly entered the conversation. The Countess of Wessex, often a quiet player in the public eye, suddenly became a focal point. Sources claim that Charles, with measured subtlety, suggested that the Sussex title could be reconsidered in the context of family responsibilities, future legacy, and public perception. The implications were clear. Harry could face a very real threat to his title, and Sophie could emerge as a legitimate candidate to inherit it. Harry's reaction, insiders say, was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and barely contained anger. Imagine being told, in a room filled with history and expectation, that a title you hold and a role you've embraced might be quietly reassigned. And imagine that the person poised to take your place is someone you never imagined could challenge you. According to reports, there were moments of raised voices, interrupted sentences, and tense silences. Moments where the weight of the conversation seemed almost unbearable. But this was not just about anger or power. The reunion reportedly included moments of vulnerability, moments where Harry confronted not just his father, but the institution itself. He questioned decisions, motives, and the perceived betrayal of trust. And Charles, in turn, is said to have responded with a combination of paternal authority and strategic restraint, reminding Harry of the broader picture, the legacy of the monarchy, and the consequences of public actions. The palace insiders hint at small but telling details. A glance toward the portraits of previous kings, a pause before answering a particularly pointed question, a hand gesture that seemed to underline a warning. These nuances, while subtle, conveyed volumes. It was a chess match, where every word, every gesture, and every silence carried meaning. And the stakes? Nothing less than the future of a title, a family, and a monarchy under constant scrutiny. As the conversation progressed, Sophie's role became even more central. Sources suggest that Charles highlighted her loyalty, discretion, and public service, qualities that, in his eyes, made her a candidate capable of carrying the Sussex title into the future. The implication was clear. Sophie's steadiness contrasted with Harry's controversies, and this contrast may have informed Charles's thinking about succession, titles, and legacy. For Harry, the reunion was reportedly both an emotional and strategic challenge. He needed to navigate his feelings toward his father, his concern for his public image, and the potential threat to his title, all at once. And according to insiders, he did so with a mixture of candor and calculation, trying to assert his perspective while recognizing the reality of his father's authority. The tension in the room, they say, was almost palpable enough to feel. But the most shocking element of the reunion, according to Palace Whispers, was what happened at the very end. The conversation, intense and emotionally charged, reportedly concluded with a statement from Charles that hinted at action. Something that was not just a discussion, not just a negotiation, but a quiet move in a long game. A move that suggested the Sussex title could indeed be passed to Sophie in the near future. And Harry's reaction? Sources hint at stunned silence, a mixture of disbelief and internal calculation as he realized the magnitude of what had just been set in motion. Imagine leaving a room where your father, the king, has subtly but unmistakably shifted the landscape beneath your feet, where the reunion, which might have been about reconciliation, also served as a pivot point for one of the most dramatic moves in recent royal history, where the title you have held and cherished could soon bear someone else's name, and where Sophie, quietly observing, could rise in prominence, poised to inherit a role many believed untouchable. So, what does this mean for the monarchy, for Harry, and for Sophie? It means that the reunion at Clarence House was more than a meeting. It was a turning point, a pivot. And according to insiders, the palace corridors are already buzzing with speculation, media analysts are spinning theories, and the public is bracing for revelations that could change everything. But the story doesn't end here. In fact, this is only the beginning. The next phase, what happens after the reunion, how the palace maneuvers, how the media reacts, and how Harry responds, is where the real drama unfolds. And that, as insiders warn, is where Sophie's influence could become undeniable. The Sussex title's future could be rewritten, and the monarchy could witness a shock unlike any in recent history. The room emptied, but the consequences lingered. A father and son, bound by blood but divided by circumstances, had spoken. Titles hung in the balance. A quiet observer waited, poised for a move that could redefine everything. And the question on everyone's mind remained, would Prince Harry accept this reality? Or fight back against what may be the most significant challenge of his life? When we talk about the Sussex title, we're not just talking about a name on a letterhead or a fancy invitation to royal galas. This is a symbol, one steeped in centuries of history, power, and prestige. And for Prince Harry, losing or even having that title questioned isn't just an administrative detail. It's a seismic shift in identity, influence, and legacy. So, what does the Sussex title really mean, and why does it matter more now than ever? The Dukedom of Sussex was first created in 1801 for Prince Augustus Frederick, the sixth son of King George III. Since then, it's carried a legacy of both prominence and controversy. Unlike other royal titles that pass predictably from parent to child, Sussex has often been linked to mavericks of the monarchy, those who challenge norms, embrace public service in unconventional ways, or court controversy. That history alone gives context to the tension surrounding Harry's title today. Titles in the royal family are more than ceremonial. They are power symbols, public markers, and keys to influence both inside the monarchy and out in the world. A duke is not just a figurehead. He has ceremonial duties, patronages, and a public presence that extends far beyond the palace walls. For Harry, the Sussex title has been a bridge between tradition and modernity, connecting him to a royal past while allowing him to carve out a contemporary identity. But now, according to insiders, that bridge may be under threat. The Clarence House reunion wasn't just a father-son heart-to-heart. It was a negotiation of power, and the Sussex title is the centerpiece. Why? Because passing it to Sophie would not only shift influence within the monarchy, it would signal a broader realignment of loyalty, perception, and succession priorities. Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, has long been regarded as a steadying force within the royal family. Her reputation for discretion, public service, and loyalty makes her an ideal candidate in the eyes of King Charles. And Sophie's role is central to this psychological dynamic. Her presence during discussions, her calm demeanor, and her strategic patience all serve to reinforce Charles's plan. She acts as both an ally and a mirror, reflecting the qualities the king values: discretion, loyalty, and measured authority. In essence, Sophie embodies the ideal outcome of Charles's strategy, a seamless transfer of influence that strengthens the monarchy while minimizing public disruption. But perhaps the most critical element of this palace strategy is timing relative to Harry's own plans. Sources suggest that Charles has closely monitored Harry's media appearances, public statements, and philanthropic engagements. Every action informs the king's calculations. How publicly defiant is Harry? How emotionally invested is he in the Sussex title? How might the public respond if a shift occurs? The palace strategy, therefore, is not static. It evolves in real time, reacting to both internal dynamics and external perceptions. Insiders also emphasize the role of subtle signaling. The Clarence House reunion wasn't just a meeting. It was a carefully staged observation of Harry's behavior, patience, and emotional state. Charles reportedly used the session to gauge not just compliance, but willingness to accept future decisions. Every word, every gesture, and every response was recorded, analyzed, and interpreted for strategic insight. The palace, in this sense, operates almost like a command center, where intelligence, psychology, and history converge to shape decisions that will reverberate for generations. And yet, for all its meticulous planning, the strategy carries risk. Harry is not easily controlled, and his reactions could disrupt even the most carefully crafted plan. Public backlash, media speculation, and unexpected alliances could all influence outcomes. Charles's strategy, therefore, must be adaptive, resilient, and anticipatory, ready to pivot while maintaining the overarching goal, the stability of the monarchy and the careful placement of the Sussex title. So what happens next? The palace has laid the groundwork, crafted the narrative, and positioned Sophie as a strategic heir apparent to the Sussex title. The chessboard is set, the pieces are in motion, and the world is watching. Harry now faces a choice that could redefine his identity, legacy, and public perception. Every step he takes could either stabilize the monarchy, escalate tensions, or catalyze unprecedented controversy. And as the strategy unfolds, one question hangs over Clarence House like a storm cloud. Will Harry comply, resist, or carve his own path? And in the midst of this intricate palace strategy, one thing is clear. What comes next could change the monarchy forever, and no one, not even the king, can predict exactly how the public or the family will respond. The moment Harry stepped into Clarence House, cameras weren't rolling, but the tension was palpable. This wasn't a ceremonial visit, a casual check-in, or a press-friendly photo op. This was a reunion charged with history, expectation, and unspoken stakes that stretched far beyond the walls of the palace. Every step he took, every glance he exchanged, every carefully measured word was under silent scrutiny. Those who were there, or who have spoken since, described the air as electrified, uneasy, and impossibly heavy. Harry's return to Clarence House was more than just a physical relocation. It was an emotional confrontation with the life he had tried to leave behind. For years, he had crafted a narrative of independence, distancing himself from the family machinery, seeking freedom from the constraints of royal protocol. But the moment he crossed that threshold, the machinery hummed back to life, and he realized just how inescapable the monarchy's orbit truly is. Inside, the king's office was meticulously arranged. Nothing was out of place. Historical artifacts, portraits, and symbols of authority weren't mere decoration. They were reminders. Each item, consciously or subconsciously, spoke to Harry about legacy, continuity, and the weight of expectation. One source described the scene. It's like the room itself is a character. It reminds you who belongs to it and who is merely visiting. For Harry, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The meeting began with polite exchanges, the kind of formal pleasantries that are a staple of royal encounters. But underneath the surface, the emotional currents were anything but polite. Reports suggest that Charles opened with measured statements about duty, legacy, and the importance of alignment with the crown's priorities. These were carefully chosen words, meant to assert authority while avoiding overt confrontation. But for Harry, each sentence felt like a subtle reminder that nothing in this world, titles, privileges, recognition, was guaranteed. And then came Sophie. The Countess of Wessex entered the room with her characteristic poise. Observers describe her presence as calm, collected, and almost deliberately neutral. Yet, her strategic positioning in the meeting was not lost on anyone. Sophie's presence wasn't merely ceremonial. It was a living embodiment of the palace's subtle message. Measured loyalty and discretion are valued over impulse and emotion. For Harry, this was a direct, unspoken challenge. The emotional undercurrent of the meeting reportedly shifted as Charles began to outline the monarchy's vision for the future, subtly referencing the Sussex title without outright mention of reassignment. Insiders reveal that Harry's reactions were closely observed. His body language, his tone, and even his pauses were scrutinized as indicators of his openness, resistance, and emotional state. Every micro-expression was being cataloged for strategic insight, feeding into the palace's larger chessboard of influence. Sources suggest that Harry's demeanor oscillated between guarded defensiveness and flashes of vulnerability. There were moments when he appeared almost nostalgic, reflecting on memories of family, childhood, and the life he had left behind. Then, in an instant, his posture would harden, revealing the residual tension, frustration, and perhaps resentment of someone who felt the world had never fully understood him. It was, by all accounts, a roller coaster of emotion contained within a deceptively calm exterior. Charles reportedly approached these moments with patience, using silence as a tool as much as words. He would pause, allow Harry to speak, and then respond with deliberate neutrality, guiding the conversation without overtly dictating it. This psychological strategy was designed not to provoke, but to probe, testing Harry's reactions and measuring his alignment or misalignment with the palace's expectations. And in these moments, the tension was almost unbearable. Observers also note the subtle use of palace protocol as a communicative tool. Every gesture, seating arrangement, and even the order of introductions conveyed messages about hierarchy, authority, and perceived loyalty. Harry, who had spent years outside the traditional royal framework, was confronted not only with words, but with an environment meticulously designed to reinforce the monarchy structure. For someone like Harry, who values autonomy and personal agency, this was both a reminder and a challenge. The conversation reportedly touched on past grievances, family dynamics, and public perceptions. Charles acknowledged Harry's achievements and charitable work, yet each acknowledgement carried an implicit caveat. Recognition is contingent upon alignment with the crown's principles and public image. Harry, aware of the underlying implications, reportedly navigated the conversation with a mix of candor, subtle defensiveness, and strategic silence. It was a delicate dance of words, emotions, and historical weight, a negotiation without a formal contract, yet with stakes higher than any legal document could convey. Sophie, meanwhile, remained the calm observer and subtle influencer. Insiders reveal that she occasionally interjected with measured comments designed to reinforce Charles's points without appearing authoritative. Her role was both supportive and strategic, an anchor for Charles and a mirror for Harry, reflecting the qualities the king values: composure, loyalty, and discretion. The psychological impact of her presence was reportedly significant, creating a layer of pressure for Harry to consider not just his own desires, but the broader implications of his choices. At some point, the Sussex title was indirectly referenced. Charles reportedly posed hypothetical scenarios, exploring the future of titles, responsibilities, and family roles. While no explicit threats were made, the implications were clear. The Sussex title, while currently Harry's, could be reassigned under certain circumstances. Sources describe Harry's reaction as a mixture of surprise, frustration, and introspection, a complex emotional cocktail that highlighted both his attachment to the title and his awareness of the monarchy's leverage. And then came the turning point. The conversation reportedly shifted from hypothetical discussions to more concrete considerations about succession, public perception, and internal family dynamics. Charles emphasized the importance of maintaining unity, upholding tradition, and protecting the monarchy's image. Harry, confronted with the reality that the Sussex title is not an untouchable birthright, but a symbol of alignment with the crown, reportedly struggled to reconcile his personal feelings with the broader implications of the family's expectations. The meeting concluded without any formal announcements, but the emotional weight lingered. Harry left Clarence House reportedly deep in thought, aware that the palace's strategy was clear, the stakes were real, and the possibility of the Sussex title being redirected to Sophie, or another strategically aligned royal, was no longer hypothetical. Insiders describe his departure as contemplative, tinged with frustration, and fraught with uncertainty about his next move. For the palace, the reunion achieved its goal. They had observed Harry, gauged his emotional state, and subtly communicated the stakes of his title's future. For Harry, the experience was a stark reminder that legacy, privilege, and recognition are not simply inherited. They are negotiated, influenced, and sometimes redirected by forces beyond one's control. And as he walked away from Clarence House, one question hung in the air. How will Harry respond to the realization that his most prized title may no longer be solely his to hold? The tensions, the subtle psychological maneuvering, and the looming possibility of a title reassignment set the stage for the next dramatic phase in this unfolding royal saga. And as palace insiders whisper about the careful orchestration behind every word, every gesture, and every pause, one truth becomes undeniable. Harry's return to Clarence House was not merely a visit. It was the beginning of a high-stakes negotiation that could redefine the monarchy's future. The moment Harry left Clarence House, the palace grounds were silent, but the world outside erupted. Within hours, whispers transformed into headlines, leaks became viral threads, and speculation ignited a media frenzy unlike anything the royal family had faced in years. News outlets, tabloids, social media platforms, and even international broadcasters picked up the story. Prince Harry had returned to Clarence House, and murmurs of the Sussex title being reassigned to Sophie were spreading like wildfire. The timing was explosive. Social media algorithms amplified every fragment of information, real or fabricated, turning the palace reunion into trending hashtags and viral clips. News organizations scrambled to verify details, while commentators and royal experts weighed in, offering interpretations, predictions, and dramatic analyses. Every frame, every angle, and every historical reference was dissected in real time. For Harry and the palace, the storm was immediate, relentless, and unavoidable. What fueled the intensity was not just the return itself, but the strategic leaks that accompanied it. Sources close to Clarence House reportedly fed selective information to trusted journalists, carefully curated details that painted the king as measured, the reunion as civil, and Sophie as poised, while hinting at potential shifts in royal titles. These leaks were designed with precision. They maintained public intrigue, controlled the narrative, and subtly applied pressure on Harry by signaling that the palace was in command of both optics and information. The media, of course, ran with the story, interpreting every detail through the lens of controversy. Headlines blared, Sussex title at risk, Harry faces family ultimatum, Sophie poised to gain power as Sussex title reassigned, and Clarence House reunion sparks royal tension. Social media users debated fiercely, dividing into camps. Some expressed sympathy for Harry, portraying him as a victim of palace manipulation, while others praised the king's strategic foresight and Sophie's steady presence. The debate became a spectacle, blending fact, conjecture, and rumor into a narrative consumed by millions. The leaks themselves were a masterclass in narrative control. Information about the meeting's subtle power dynamics, Harry's emotional responses, and Sophie's role was trickled out in stages, ensuring that each day brought new revelations. Observers describe a deliberate strategy. The palace wanted the story to evolve organically in the public eye, keeping Harry reactive while framing Sophie and Charles in favorable terms. Each leak reinforced the underlying message. Titles are not merely symbolic. They are instruments of loyalty, compliance, and legacy. Meanwhile, pundits and royal commentators dissected every aspect of the reunion. Video clips of Harry arriving, walking through the palace gates, and leaving were replayed endlessly, each movement scrutinized for signs of tension, discomfort, or defiance. Analysts compared these gestures to historical precedents, suggesting that Harry's posture and demeanor hinted at internal conflict and contemplation. Even minor details, like his choice of coat, the timing of his handshake, or the length of his pauses, were imbued with meaning, feeding public fascination and speculation. Social media, as ever, amplified the drama. Twitter threads exploded with live commentary. Instagram Reels highlighted micro-moments from the reunion, and TikTok creators offered speculative recreations of the meeting. The palace narrative was both amplified and challenged, creating a dynamic feedback loop where public opinion, media interpretation, and palace strategy interacted in unpredictable ways. For Charles and his advisors, monitoring and managing this digital storm became an extension of the reunion itself, a test of public perception, loyalty, and narrative control. Some leaks hinted at the potential reasoning behind a Sussex title reassignment. According to insiders, the palace aimed to signal that the title's future depends not on birthright alone, but on alignment with the crown's expectations, public perception, and family cohesion. These leaks, though subtle, were incendiary. They suggested that Harry's independence, public disclosures, and media appearances could influence his status within the monarchy. The implication was clear: privilege is contingent, and titles can shift when loyalty and discretion are called into question. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. Royal enthusiasts debated the ethics of reassignment. Historians weighed in on precedent, and casual observers were drawn to the human drama unfolding behind the gilded doors of Clarence House. Social sentiment became a battleground. Some framed Sophie as the rightful steward of a title grounded in discretion and loyalty, while others painted Harry as the wronged son, victimized by centuries of tradition and rigid expectations. Memes, opinion pieces, and viral threads flooded the internet, turning the palace narrative into a cultural event. Critics, too, had their say. Some commentators accused the palace of orchestrating a media spectacle to pressure Harry, questioning the ethical implications of leaks and narrative manipulation. Others defended the monarchy, arguing that strategic communication is necessary to maintain stability and public trust. The controversy spilled into international coverage, with media outlets from Europe, North America, and Asia picking up the story, further amplifying tension and global scrutiny. As the media storm raged, the palace reportedly monitored sentiment, engagement metrics, and narrative trends with unprecedented intensity. Advisors tracked public perception minute by minute, adjusting messaging, managing leaks, and preparing for contingencies. It was a calculated dance: control what could be controlled, observe what could not, and always remain several steps ahead of the narrative. Every article, every post, and every broadcast became part of a broader strategy, one designed to reinforce authority, signal consequences, and shape the public's understanding of the Sussex title's future. But the media storm was not just external, it also had internal consequences. Family members reportedly watched with varying degrees of concern, amusement, and frustration. Allies of Harry questioned his next moves, while loyalists to Charles and Sophie interpreted the narrative as validation of strategic foresight. The palace, aware of the ripple effects on both public perception and family dynamics, used the storm as both a pressure point and a testing ground, observing reactions and gauging compliance without overt confrontation. Then came the turning point. Selective leaks suggested that Sophie might officially assume the Sussex title in the near future. While nothing was confirmed, the mere suggestion was explosive. Public opinion surged, social media debates intensified, and royal commentators scrambled to contextualize the unprecedented development. The palace's careful orchestration had achieved its goal. Curiosity was piqued, tension was maximized, and Harry now faced the reality that his title, identity, and public persona were inextricably linked to the monarchy's strategic decisions. As the digital storm continued to build, one truth became undeniable. The reunion at Clarence House was more than a private family meeting. It was the opening salvo in a high-stakes battle over titles, legacy, and influence. Every tweet, article, and broadcast reinforced the gravity of the situation, creating an environment where Harry's next move would not only affect his own standing, but potentially redefine the monarchy's structure and public perception for generations to come. And while the world debated, analyzed, and speculated, the palace remained silent, watching and calculating. Every leak, every headline, and every viral moment was a test of strategy, patience, and influence. A test that would soon force Harry to confront the possibility that his most cherished title might no longer be entirely his. The moment Sophie's name began circulating in connection with the Sussex title, a subtle shift occurred, not just in palace strategy, but in public perception. Unlike other royals whose presence can ignite polarizing reactions, Sophie has long maintained a carefully cultivated image. Poised, loyal, understated, yet undeniably influential within the royal hierarchy. And now, as rumors swirled that the Sussex title could be redirected to her, every detail of her life, public appearances, and relationships was suddenly under intense scrutiny. Turning Point USA's response only fanned the flames. They demanded answers. They called for investigations. They hinted, without naming Meghan directly, that outside forces were trying to dismantle their movement. And for supporters, that was enough. The Duchess had gone from royal exile to prime suspect in the court of public opinion. And here's the cruel twist. Whether Meghan was guilty or not didn't matter. Her name being linked was the damage. Because in politics, perception is power. And perception was already spinning out of control. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. Behind the mourning and tributes, whispers began to surface about what Kirk had been working on in the weeks leading up to his death. Whispers of private meetings, sealed documents, and exposés that could have embarrassed not just political rivals, but global celebrities with reputations to protect. And if those whispers are true, then Charlie Kirk wasn't just killed for who he was. He was killed for what he was about to reveal. And that revelation, the one Kirk never got to share, may hold the key to why Meghan Markle's name was dragged into this case in the first place. Why does Meghan Markle's name keep showing up in the most unexpected, most scandalous, most unbelievable of places? That's the question millions were asking as this story unfolded. Because just when the world thought it had seen every royal controversy possible, Diana's tragedy, Prince Andrew's downfall, Harry's exile, suddenly Meghan, the self-declared escapee of palace life, was being whispered about in connection to a political assassination in Utah. How do you even begin to make sense of that? Let's pull back and look at the bigger picture. Meghan Markle has always been a magnet for drama. From the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, her story was sold as a fairy tale. The American actress who captured a prince's heart, the modern Cinderella walking into Buckingham Palace. But the fairy tale didn't last long. Instead of happily ever after, Meghan's life became a storm of tabloids, lawsuits, and accusations. Remember the Oprah interview? Meghan sitting under the California sun, eyes brimming with tears, saying she was silenced, saying she feared for her life, saying the institution didn't protect her. To many, she became the face of resilience, the woman who fought back against the crown. But to others, she was a manipulator, spinning narratives, playing victim while quietly building her own empire. And that's where the contradictions begin to stack up. Meghan told the world she wanted privacy, yet signed multi-million-dollar Netflix and Spotify deals. She said she wanted peace, yet continued to give explosive interviews. She said she was leaving politics behind, yet was photographed alongside politicians, influencers, and billionaires. Every move she made seemed to contradict the last. So when Robinson named her in his confession, it wasn't just shocking. It felt, in some twisted way, almost believable. Because Meghan had already become a character larger than life. A woman whose name seemed to orbit every controversy, whether she wanted it or not. Think about this. What if Meghan wasn't directly involved? What if she was simply the perfect scapegoat? Her name guaranteed headlines. Her name guaranteed clicks. Her name guaranteed that the story would leap from political forums into mainstream news cycles. Maybe Robinson said her name not because she was guilty, but because she was useful. But here's the problem. As investigators dug deeper, they found patterns that made her name harder and harder to dismiss. For instance, Meghan's network in California wasn't just made up of Hollywood insiders. It included tech moguls with political ambitions, donors with connections to PACs, strategists who had played roles in silencing voices they didn't agree with. And some of those names, shockingly, overlapped with names on Robinson's encrypted contact list. Coincidence? Or connection? And then came the whispers from across the Atlantic. Reports that Meghan's name had surfaced before, in private conversations about influence operations. That meetings in London and California had blurred lines between activism, philanthropy, and politics. Meghan had insisted she wasn't political. But her actions, her alliances, told a different story. The irony is staggering. Meghan Markle, who said she wanted out of the monarchy because it was a trap, now accused of walking straight into another trap, one spun from politics, media, and power. She fled the palace walls only to build a new fortress of influence in California. A fortress with doors that opened to billionaires, strategists, and possibly even the kinds of people who could orchestrate silencing an activist like Charlie Kirk. And here's the question I have for you. Do you really think Meghan is just unlucky, constantly dragged into scandals against her will? Or do you think she thrives in the chaos, feeding off the attention, knowing that even bad press keeps her name alive? Because every time her name shows up in a story like this, her brand grows. Victim to some, villain to others, but always relevant, always in the spotlight. And relevance, in the world Meghan lives in now, is power. But here's the twist no one saw coming. While the world debated whether Meghan was a scapegoat or a conspirator, investigators stumbled onto something they couldn't ignore: private communications between Robinson and an associate whose digital footprint traced back, however faintly, to Meghan's wider circle. Was it proof? No, but it was smoke. And where there's smoke, the public is conditioned to believe there's fire. So maybe Meghan wasn't the mastermind. Maybe she wasn't orchestrating anything. But maybe she was in the room with people who were. And in cases like this, proximity is enough. Guilt by association becomes the weapon, and Meghan's silence only fanned the flames. Every hour she didn't respond. Every day she stayed quiet. The story grew teeth. People began asking, if she was innocent, why not speak up? Why let Rogan, Robinson, and the media twist her name into knots? Unless silence was safer than opening the floodgates. Unless denial would risk exposing something even darker. And then came the cruelest irony of all. The same press that Meghan has spent years battling was now her only possible ally. But instead of defending her, they smelled blood. Headlines screamed her name next to Kirk's. Columnists speculated about her influence. Tabloids splashed her photo alongside crime scene images. Meghan wasn't just part of the story anymore. She was the story. So here we are, standing at the edge of a contradiction that can't be easily explained. Is Meghan Markle the perpetual victim of forces beyond her control? Or is she a player in a much larger game, carefully shaping her role even when the narrative turns deadly? Because as investigators peeled back more layers, one thing became clear. Meghan's ties didn't end with donors and strategists. They stretched into places no one expected, places that connected directly to Charlie Kirk's world. And when those ties were revealed, the theory that Meghan was just a scapegoat crumbled. What came next would silence even Meghan's fiercest defenders and leave the world asking whether the Duchess had crossed a line she could never return from. Why did the media go into overdrive the second Meghan Markle's name was mentioned? Why did headlines explode? Why did anchors scramble? Why did entire networks seem to shift gears almost overnight? That's the question that defines this chapter. Because when it comes to Meghan Markle, the media doesn't just report, it reacts. And in this case, that reaction may have revealed more than anyone intended. The moment Joe Rogan uttered the words "arrest warrants" and Meghan Markle, it was like tossing gasoline onto a bonfire. Clips of his podcast flooded TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. Millions shared, debated, dissected. And almost immediately, mainstream media outlets rushed in. CNN called it dangerous conspiracy fodder. The BBC called it reckless speculation. Even late-night hosts mocked it. But here's the paradox. Every attempt to shut the story down only amplified it. Think about it. If the story was truly nonsense, why give it oxygen? Why spend valuable airtime discrediting a claim you could just ignore? The fact that they reacted so quickly, so aggressively, made people wonder, what were they trying so hard to bury? Because here's the contradiction. Meghan Markle has spent years telling the world she's a victim of unfair press, that she's been smeared, misrepresented, bullied by tabloids. Yet in this moment, when she was tied to something unthinkable, the very media she despises seemed to leap to her defense. Why? Some say it was simple. Protect the Duchess, protect the clicks. Meghan stories sell, but Meghan scandals sell even more. Others say it was deeper, that Meghan, through her media allies and legal teams, has more influence than the public realizes. That when her name needed to be shielded, editors got calls, headlines got softened, stories got pulled. And isn't that, in itself, a form of power? But the internet doesn't play by those rules. Independent journalists dug in. Forums lit up with theories. Screenshots and leaked messages claimed to show connections between Robinson and Meghan's wider circle. Were they real? Maybe. Maybe not. But in the court of public opinion, they didn't need to be. The suggestion was enough. And then came the leaked clip. Buried in the avalanche of cell phone footage from the night of the shooting, one video surfaced that seemed, at first, unremarkable. A shaky shot of the crowd, screams in the background, chaos everywhere. But when slowed down and enhanced, people swore they heard a voice, a panicked shout of a name. Not Kirk. Not Robinson. Meghan. Was it real? Was it edited? Nobody could prove it. But the clip went viral, and once it did, it was unstoppable. Millions replayed it, arguing about whether the voice said Meghan or something else entirely. And the more people argued, the more the story spread. Mainstream networks tried to bury the clip, calling it doctored. But the takedown attempts only fueled suspicion. Why censor it if it was meaningless? Why fight so hard if it was fake? Once again, silence and suppression worked like accelerants, convincing people there had to be truth inside the noise. And here's where the irony bites. Meghan Markle, the woman who claimed she wanted nothing more than to control her narrative, had lost control completely. She wasn't giving interviews. She wasn't issuing statements. She wasn't visible at all. And in the void of her silence, the media built a monster. But it wasn't just the mainstream and the internet. Politicians began weighing in. Conservative commentators framed Meghan as the face of elitist hypocrisy. Liberal pundits called it a distraction. International outlets speculated about the royal family's reaction. Meghan's name wasn't just trending, it was global. And here's the question you need to ask yourself. Was Meghan dragged into this against her will, or was her silence part of a larger strategy? Because let's not forget, every time Meghan is in the headlines, her brand grows. Love her or hate her, people are talking. And in the currency of modern power, attention is gold. Still, the backlash grew dangerous. Protesters gathered outside TPUSA offices demanding justice. Conspiracy theorists held signs with Meghan's name. Online petitions called for investigations. And the Duchess, once photographed sipping lattes in Montecito, was now the centerpiece of a crime story that wouldn't die. And then came the strangest move of all. Late one night, during a panel discussion on cable news, a legal analyst slipped. Asked about sealed warrants, she hesitated, then said, "I can't confirm specifics, but there are names in those documents the public would recognize. Big names." She caught herself, tried to backtrack. But the damage was done. The internet seized on it, convinced Meghan's name was officially inside those files. Do you see the pattern? Every denial became confirmation. Every attempt to quiet the story turned into evidence. Every move the media made, whether to shield or to suppress, only made the world believe Meghan's guilt more. And here's the cruel twist. Whether Meghan was innocent or guilty didn't matter anymore. The narrative was bigger than her. She had become the perfect symbol. The Duchess who fled the crown, now tied to an American tragedy. A woman who wanted to silence the media, now drowned in it. But the storm wasn't over. Because while the media played its game, investigators in Utah stumbled onto something no one expected. A hidden trail, buried in local records, that tied Meghan's name not just to donors and dinners, but to Utah itself. And when that trail came to light, the case turned from shocking to utterly chilling. What does Utah have to do with Meghan Markle? How does a duchess in California, a podcaster in Texas, and a shooter in Orem suddenly converge in one of the strangest storylines of the decade? That's the question investigators had to face when the Utah connection emerged, and it wasn't the kind of answer anyone was ready for. Let's rewind. At first glance, Utah was just the backdrop. A conservative state. A college campus. The location where Charlie Kirk drew crowds and, ultimately, met his end. But investigators digging deeper into Robinson's movements realized Utah wasn't just a stage, it was a setup. And hidden inside that setup were threads that stretched much farther than anyone realized. Robinson hadn't picked Utah randomly. He'd been there weeks before. Hotel records showed him checking into low-budget motels under different names. Security cameras caught him walking near Utah Valley University long before Kirk's event was announced. That detail was critical. How did Robinson know to scout the location before it was even public? Unless someone told him. And then came the paper trail. Financial records revealed Robinson had received 2 suspicious wire transfers in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Small enough to avoid notice. Large enough to matter. The origin? Accounts funneled through charities with vague mission statements. Charities whose boards included names linked, directly or indirectly, to Meghan and Harry's ventures in California. Coincidence? Or breadcrumb? Investigators began pulling city permits, contracts, anything tied to the rally. And in the mountain of paperwork, one thing jumped out. A local PR firm had been involved in facilitating the event. A firm that, bizarrely, had also worked with a production company tied to Meghan's Netflix projects. How does that happen? Utah isn't Hollywood. And yet, there it was. The whispers started. Maybe Meghan wasn't the puppet master. Maybe she wasn't even aware. But her orbit, her network of media deals, donors, and strategists, was closer to Utah than anyone thought. Now let's talk about the hidden camera feed. During the chaos of the shooting, a university surveillance camera picked up a wide-angle view of the stage. Investigators reviewing the footage noticed something strange, not in the shooting itself, but in the moments before. A man, standing off to the side, speaking into an earpiece. He wasn't part of security. He wasn't staff. Yet he appeared calm, collected, even as the shots rang out. When detectives froze the frame and enhanced the footage, they traced the man back to a consulting group with ties to Los Angeles. A group that, months earlier, had attended meetings in Montecito. Meetings where Meghan Markle herself was present. Do you see how the lines start to blur? A duchess in California. A shooter in Utah. A consulting group that bridges the gap. Too neat. Too precise. Too suspicious. And here's the irony. Meghan has often spoken about being trapped in institutions larger than herself. About being used as a figurehead. About being manipulated. What if this time, that story was true, but in a way darker than she ever imagined? What if her name was being used not just in gossip columns, but in actual operations? As news of the Utah connection spread, the internet went wild. Some argued Meghan was being framed. That powerful forces had planted her name to distract from the real culprits. Others insisted this was proof she was knee-deep in networks most people never see. Either way, the Duchess had become unavoidable in the narrative. And then came the discovery that pushed everything over the edge. Buried in Robinson's phone, a device investigators cracked after days of work, were photos. Not of Kirk, not of maps or weapons, but of documents. Documents showing donation lists, contracts, even screenshots of emails. And in one corner of a blurred-out attachment was a name, Markle. Could it have been fabricated? Sure. Could it have been planted? Absolutely. But the fact that it was there at all was enough to change everything. Meghan Markle wasn't just a name Robinson said in a police room. She was now a name appearing in his files, in his phone, in his Utah connection. And here's the cruel twist. Meghan didn't step foot in Utah. She wasn't anywhere near Orem that night. But the shadows of her network, her brand, her influence, they were. And perception, in the age of digital hysteria, is often more powerful than proof. So what do you believe? That Meghan Markle was the mastermind behind Charlie Kirk's death? That she was a pawn in a game much bigger than herself? Or that she was a convenient name, dropped into a narrative to distract the public while the real power players stayed hidden? Because no matter which answer you choose, one truth remains. Meghan's silence gave the story life. And as investigators pushed deeper into Utah's strange ties, They realized the storm was only beginning, because the next phase of the case wouldn't be about Utah anymore. It would be about silence, the silence of Meghan Markle herself. A silence so loud it made the world ask, what is she hiding?